Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Trainers Forum presented by HRD Specialized Canine Training. I am Paul Martin, your host. Tonight, our guest trainer is Liz LaPointe from Canine Search Initiative based in Massachusetts. It is July 30th, 2020. Hope everybody is doing well while we try to maintain our training and improve our training and all stay safe and well and away from the effects of COVID. I'd like to take a few minutes and just introduce Liz to everybody. I've known Liz 5, 6, 7 years now. And one of the things that she has always stood out when I have seen her at trainings is that she has some absolute dynamite dogs. They come out of the kennel, they know their job, they are focused on doing the task at hand. And Liz has always been so humble, so, that's what they're supposed to do about it. And I can really appreciate that as a handler and trainer myself. And through Canine Search Initiative, she has the opportunity to host some amazing trainers there in Massachusetts. And I'm actually jealous with some of the trainers that she's able to bring in there. I wish I was actually closer instead of just outside of Memphis. If I was closer, it'd make it so much easier to get to some of these things that Liz hosts up there. But enough of my introduction. I'm going to actually turn this over to Liz at this point. And what we're going to actually do is we're going to try to allow her to switch screens. And so everything will be generated off of her computer. So, Liz, you still with me?
I'm still with you, Paul. All right, so you're still sharing, so I'll need you to stop sharing so that I can share. All right.
Okay.
Slideshow. And you can let me know when my screen is up for everyone.
I believe it is up. It's gotten all of the changeover, and I know our participants over on Facebook Live there's a little bit of a lag, but I think you're good to go.
All right. All right. So first off, I need to begin just with acknowledging mentors and teachers and the opportunities I've had to learn some of these skills. Paul, thank you in particular for your knowledge and your willingness to share that, and also for this opportunity to share what little I've learned with a broader audience. My primary mentor in detection is Don Blair of Canine Intelligence Academy. He's out of Chicago. When I first met Don, 8 or 9 years ago, I said, I have to train with you. Everything makes so much more sense through his methods. He's a super coach, incredibly supportive, and he's all about success and clarity in the work of detection trainers and handlers. And so if you ever get the opportunity to train directly with Don, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And most of what I really know about detection, I've learned from him. He continues to evolve in his thinking and his instruction, and I just can't recommend him more highly than that. My good friend Julie Blanding, who's been on a dog training journey with me for years now and first introduced me to the importance of motivation and play with my dogs. And it's with her that I recently have enrolled in the Training Without Conflict by Ivan Balabanov. I was one of the first group of trainers to go down and do the live training with him, which was really fantastic. So if you also have that opportunity, I highly recommend it. Some of the things, the nuance in training dogs and motivating dogs that he presented, nobody else has these techniques, and yet it's all grounded in learning theory, and your understanding of learning theory will be firmly cemented after his course. And then, of course, all the seminars I've attended, Center for Forensic Training and Education, HRD Specialized Training, Superfit Canine, all these fantastic groups that have presented information. You got to get out there to learn different things, to see different things. So highly recommend these and many, many others. And, of course, perhaps the biggest teachers are our dogs, right? And I've been fortunate enough to have a number of dogs over the past decade or so that I've been able to work with, including a couple of newbies that I've just started, and it's kind of fun it's continuing to evolve in my own training methods. So just to give an overview of what I'll be discussing, you know, when I was introduced to search and rescue years and years ago, we didn't do anything on leash. The leash was a bit of a hassle, unless you were trailing or doing tracking, and then obviously the leash was important. But in detection work, live find, and human remains work, typically all the work was done off leash, and that was my first exposure to it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why I am now a huge advocate for on-leash training and for on-leash work, and for some reasons why not. And some of these are what I would consider wives' tales. As Don might say, he said, if you can't handle a dog on leash, it's because you're essentially a lousy handler. You really need the skill set to do both, and you have to practice it to get that skill set. We're going to talk a little bit about equipment, and these again are recommendations that I'm going to make based on my experience. And then we're going to talk specifically about 4 really important on-leash training exercises. And we'll go through that. I'll show you some videos, and I'm hoping the videos show pretty well. That was one of the reasons why I'm going to try to do the screen sharing, is because they were kind of coming over very choppy when Paul was sharing. So Paul, definitely slow me down if you're seeing any issues, and we'll hopefully go from there. So if you're working on leash or off leash, the goals are the same, and the specs for our detection dogs, right? We want them to be independent of us. We want to make sure the handler is not in the picture as far as giving cues, known or unknown, to the dog. We want them to be capable of doing both on-leash and off-leash detection. They shouldn't behave differently. The task at hand should be clear. The leash is just a piece of equipment. Obviously, we want our dogs to be reliable. How do we create that? Well, we create that through our training. We want a fluent, trained final response, and we want them obedient to odor, but also to the handler. And of course, there's always a bit of a balance here, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So these are things we keep in mind whether we're on a leash or not. So why the leash? The most important thing in my mind is training, all right? I'm a huge proponent of setting up your environment for the dog's learning and detection. It's not handler involvement. It's placing odor at whatever threshold is appropriate for the stage of learning that the dog has in locations that are going to optimize learning. And so in order for me to control that environment, I need to be able to control where my dog is. If I'm working inside, that may mean I need to keep him in a certain room or a space. If I'm working outside and I want to move him through an odor cone perpendicular to the wind direction, then I need to be on leash to do that. Otherwise, he may go explore doggy odors or work for himself. And so when I am creating patterns of behavior for this particular work. I need to be able to control it and interrupt when I see things that I don't want to see. And to do that, I need to have something on my dog. And in fact, these puppies that I'm working with right now that are 6 months old, I don't really have a recall on them at this point, and so keeping them on leash becomes something very important just from that perspective. Deployment. Know what and how thoroughly your dog has searched an area. And so I'm thinking about forensic applications primarily. You're thinking about vehicle searches. You want to have the confidence to know that you've searched that entire area. The other obvious thing that jumps out at us is, of course, safety. And obviously there's going to be times when you don't know if there's things you don't want your dog to get into, like rat poison or antifreeze. These could be in abandoned buildings or in, unsavory parts of town, shall we say. And so you want to be able to control the safety of your animal as well as for yourself, and so sometimes you need them online for that. And of course, if you're working near a road or areas with a lot of traffic, obviously we need to be able to work them online and keep them safe. Even when you have super strong obedience, I think it's still very important. So what I'm not teaching, and this is a very terrible video I stole off the internet, is the magic hand, which you can see in the picture at the top. And this is kind of the old way the police used to train. If you can see it, you'll see that the officer is blocking the dog. He's on a leash. He's kind of pointing out where on this vehicle the dog should actually be searching. And that's not what we're looking for right now. We actually want the dog to be out in front of us. We want them to be independent, and we want them to have been trained to detect odor, in particular in productive areas. That does mean they're going to be slightly object-oriented in some cases, and we need to balance that with odor obedience that's not object-oriented. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. So why not the leash? All right, so we could have handler interference or handler cueing. And I would argue that handlers can interfere and handlers can cue whether there's a leash involved or not. It's not going to necessarily increase these particular things that we kind of want to do sometimes, or we do it unsuspecting. That's going to happen whether or not you've got a leash. Could signify obedience training or other training activities. And this is absolutely the case, especially if you have a handler who's bringing a dog, maybe an adult dog, to a new search and rescue team, and they've had all this obedience or agility or other types of training that's involved a lot of leash work and attention. And sometimes it can be very difficult because of all of that reinforcement history on the leash is focused on the handler, and it's hard to get them to be independent. Sometimes leashes signify non-work time. If you always take your dog out for a walk on the leash, then they may not equate leash to actually doing any kind of work at all. The old adage, I want my dog to be independent of me. We can create very independent dogs on leash as well as off leash. And I would also argue that the creation of a really independent dog actually will depend upon you having good leash skills in the beginning of your training, because those patterns that you teach will then work to the dog's advantage whether there's a leash involved or not. Could interfere with self-discovery of odor, and there's different ways of training this. But you'll find that dogs, especially in the early stages of learning, will self-discover all sorts of odors, some of which you want them to discover and some of which you don't. And so, work is work with my dogs, and when we're working, we're controlling that environment so that I get the results that I want. I'm not controlling the dog with the exception of the leash. I'm setting up my environment to basically give the dog the information that they need so they're successful and they get a reinforcer that they want. Slows the dog down. This can sometimes be true, and sometimes this is a good thing, and sometimes this may not be a good thing. Again, it depends upon your skills. Handler dog leash entanglements, as kind of shown in this picture. Yes, this absolutely happens. It happens to the best of us. It's going to happen every once in a while, especially when the dogs start to drive toward odor, and they'll overstep or they'll go backwards or do something like that. And you know what? Dogs that are really driven for their odor, this will not be a problem with them. It's just as easy to drop the leash if that becomes an issue, and the dog will still move toward odor. Obviously, there's going to be environments where leashes are not helpful. If your working environment is deep woods with brush and brambles, yeah, obviously ditch the leash. It's unnecessary. If you know you're looking for a full body, a full set of remains out in a ginormous field, and you know you've got a very high threshold to odor, it doesn't make a lot of sense necessarily to work that dog on leash. when you can cover that area far more quickly off leash. So some common pitfalls and misconceptions: leash work only used for obedience, and we've got those dogs that show handler focus and engagement. It's gorgeous, all this eye contact with high reinforcement history. It's flashy, but sometimes this is where we have challenges with those dogs working away from the handler. And so I like this kind of obedience personally, and I've competed in this kind of obedience even with some search dogs, and in fact you can have both. It can be a misconception that you can't have both. You can absolutely have awesome obedience with your dogs as well as fantastic detection. However, I do stress in my earlier stages of training the detection side of things and the creation of an independent dog, and then we bring into the obedience work later on when I've already got that piece established. So we do often see some conflicting training, right? And this little video here that I'm going to play is of this absolutely gorgeous field-bred lab who's trained in obedience and field work, and he's also a nose work dog. He's a relatively green nose work dog. I think he's a nose work 1 level. And this is a woman who attended one of our seminars, and she's doing a very simple point-to-point exercise, which we're going to explain in much more detail. There's an aid on the light pole, and it's a big aid. It's like ginormous amount of odor. We've got the dog on pavement to reduce environmental distractions, and you can see sometimes he pulls that way, but for the most part he doesn't know what he's doing out there, and his odor obedience is not strong enough to overcome the reinforcement history that he's had with this handler. There's nothing bad about this, and you're going to see this if this is your background with your dog. What then needs to happen is it becomes clear that odor obedience is not that important in your dog's realm of thinking, and you need to up your motivation for your odor. So this is a fantastic troubleshooting exercise, and it tells us a whole ton about what's going on with this particular handler team. And this is one of the exercises we're going to talk about in much more detail. All right, so we're going to jump into equipment, and we'll go through that pretty quick. And you know, I'm always a little surprised when I see the plethora of equipment that will often come out at seminars when they're working with dogs, and so these are my preferences and recommendations, but obviously you might have your own, and you know, to each their own. But my recommendations include really lightweight leashes. I like leather. I like splice stops in the leather, sometimes in my longer lines. The key things with using a lightweight line is whether it's on a collar or on a harness, given that any indoor work or vehicle work for the most part is done on a loose leash, that line, when it's in a nice loose J, will not pull on that collar. It's not going to add an additional cue or interfere with what the dog is thinking. Whereas if you've got a big heavy leash or a rope or some of those biothane leashes, you know, they feel every time that leash swings. And so we want to minimize that, right? We want as much of that dog's brain on his detection exercise and not on nagging things going on their body. The other piece is it's less material for you to hold on to as a handler. You've got a handful of line, and we want to keep that as easy as possible. It'll decrease the entanglements. You'll have less of just a bird's nest in your hand, and so that becomes important. How much line do you need? It depends on the environment you're working in. So for indoor work and vehicles, typically a 6-foot leash is just fine. And for outside work, point-to-points, roadside, 8 to 10 feet. Maybe 15 if you really want it, but probably no more than that. It just is kind of a bit of a mess. And I use as thin lines for my outdoor work where there will be tension on the leash as I do for my indoor work. So here's my recommendations. Thin leather maintained with a small clip. And again, lightweight, even if you got a big dog. 6 feet with a loop and an 8 to 10 foot line with a loop. And I like a splice at like 4 feet and sometimes at 6 feet. And basically when I'm moving my dog between things, it's just nicer to have an easy place to grab. And you know, a vendor I like is Bold Lead Designs, because they'll make whatever you want and put splices wherever you want. And they use really nice quality leather. So it's not really a plug for them, but some people ask, well, where do I get that? What I don't recommend are these heavy lines. Of course, I own all these, so I've handled them myself and realized why they don't really work. Biothane, braided leather, rope, nylon. Again, it's just too much to hang on to, and it pulls on the harness and the collar. The only other thing I would potentially recommend is, especially when you're doing outdoor work, is the use of gloves. I use them oftentimes because my dogs play pretty rough, but also when they take off on odor and I'm on the other end of the line, you can get some pretty good burns even with leather. But in particular, if you're using biothane or some of these braided leashes or even nylon, you can give yourself a pretty good burn. On the harness side, I do prefer to use harnesses when I'm starting young dogs and puppies. Again, they tend to be a little more easily distracted by things on their leash, on their collar. They frequently don't have good, leash walking skills because I kind of keep them a little young and crazy. And so the chest plate then takes that pressure off of their neck and puts it on their body. This particular harness I had custom made by a friend of mine, and I like the fact that it's got these quick releases on what goes underneath the belly, and that just makes it really easy for me to get it on and off the dog. And again, I like leather versus biothane. I think there's a little less chafing, they're a little lighter, but leather, of course, requires some care. What I don't recommend are vests. Now, I love vests. They look cool in our dogs, and lots of people use them for stuff, but they don't fit the dogs as well as a proper harness with that chest plate. And so frequently they're going to shift on the body when the leash is taut. Dogs can't be at all sensitive to leash pressure if you do in fact need it because it sort of moves around. And I have seen them break as well. So if a dog really takes off after something, that may not be your sturdiest option. And just remember, it's not about the equipment. You should be able to show up at training or deploy whether the dog whether you happen to remember your harness and your most favorite leash. If they're not there, you still should be able to work your dog on a collar or whatever you have. The cue to search should be irrespective of equipment. And I think a lot of people believe that, well, if I put this certain harness on my dog, then they know they're doing this job, and if they've got this other job, then I'm going to use this equipment. And yeah, those are sometimes cues, but I would more prefer that folks rely on the cue to search, the verbal cue, the physical cue that you may be using, and that should mean one thing in that dog's mind, and that is to go find the dead body or whatever human remains you've got. On collars, again, handler preference here. I tend to like wide, flat collars for the work, especially if they're going to be doing outdoor work where we do expect some tension on the collar. It's just a little bit easier on their throat and their trachea. I don't recommend things like fur savers or like really thin collars for that kind of work. Again, just distribute that pressure across a wider area. What about prong collars? I have absolutely seen prong collars be quite useful for dogs that pull way too much. Sometimes on indoor work, sometimes they're just sensitive enough that they will back off, and it refocuses them on the work. Again, this is just sometimes will work for some dogs, sometimes won't work for others. There may be pure positive people out in our audience that don't agree with prong collars. I find that they're actually quite effective in training work with very light pressure on the line because the dogs respect that, not because it hurts, but because of how that pressure is distributed across those metal pieces. But do I use them typically? Is it my go-to collar to train detection? No, I do not. We start with flat collars and we start with harnesses, and that's where we go. But I have seen this be useful for troubleshooting. What about e-collars? So I don't use e-collars with my detection dogs. I have used it a little bit with my live find dog when he's off leash and away from my view, because if I absolutely need him to come back, or I've got a victim that's not my designated victim, and I hate to even contemplate that, but his obedience to finding that person is really, really strong, and I don't want him to scare the bejeebus out of somebody I didn't intend on scaring, and so it's important that I just have a little bit more control there. But my HR dogs don't work in e-collars. Some people like them because it's a little bit of an insurance policy. That's when they're using it as a true aversive, right? A lot of people in some other areas are using them on working levels, on saying, oh, my dog works at an 8, and that's just a light tap on them, and they don't mind, and they work through it. My personal opinion about e-collars is it is an aversive, and even if people believe it not to be because it's a working level, it's still an aversive, and so it's not a go-to, but I do see people use them, and that's fine if that's working for them. All right, let's talk about some handler skills here. So how do you hold a leash? And this seems like a very simple thing, but actually it's not, and it requires a lot of practice. This is my friend Linda and her dog Chaos. He's a pretty high drive German Shepherd, but she's got some really sweet skills. Loop is over the thumb, and we do like a loop at the end of the leash, primarily because that's your stopgap. If in fact the dog does move out from you, you can always just close your hand and you've got him. But then the rest of the leash, as you can see in this picture, is just gently looped through so that as the dog moves forward, she can play out the leash and maintain that light J that you can see from the collar to the hand, and that there's no pressure on that collar. That dog is working in front of her, he's independent, he's looking for odor. So this is what I would use for vehicles, interiors, just distraction boxes, etc. And your ideal position is by your dog's right shoulder, slightly behind. Obviously, depending upon the speed of the dog, it's really going to depend upon where your body position is. I've got some speedy, hectic dogs, and it can be really hard to maintain this. So you wear your sneakers and you try to keep up if in fact that dog is being accurate. If that dog is not being accurate, then there's things we need to do to slow them down. But usually it's not leash pressure. Another example here, that letter J, ensure that loose leash whenever, especially working indoors or working vehicles. Let that leash be able to run out as needed. There's 2 lanes here. And we're going to talk about search sequence and training that on leash so that you have a better sense of that. But I keep my dogs working the exterior of a room, going around clockwise, and then you do any interior items going around counterclockwise. So the dog remains on your left. He should be checking all of the available objects, and then and I'm just making sure he's not missing anything, that he is going, he's seam sucking when there are seams available, he's breaking planes, getting above things, and he's also breaking them below. So he's evaluating the full 3-dimension. If I feel like he's missed something there, I can either lodge it in my mind to go back there, or I can just monitor his behavior depending upon what I'm looking for to see if there was a particular change. But once you learn this kind of search pattern, the dogs typically will follow it, and you can have greater success as well as reliability with the dogs as far as them searching the areas fairly thoroughly. Opposition reflex. Okay, so this is something I think we're all familiar with. The dog leans into the collar. It creates a lot of tension. Pavlov called this the freedom reflex. It's just a natural instinct to pull against resistance. Typically, if you've got a reasonably well-trained detection dog, they'll be pulling toward odor. That's a good thing. We like that. However, frequently, there's a lot of dogs out there that will also pull when they're not searching. And so it becomes really important that you're able to recognize what is going on here. If they're pulling toward odor, there's going to be other changes in their body that you should be aware of. If they're not pulling toward odor and they're not searching, typically they are coming off whatever you're looking for. They're creeping into the handler lane. There's other things going on, and that, again, you should be able to distinguish those. And one of the exercises we're going to talk about is going to give you the opportunity to look at what's going on in a dog's body and really start to identify those changes in behavior that indicate when he's in odor versus just pulling. And that's one of the things that comes out of the point-to-point. So here's a little video of Linda and Chaos again. He can be kind of a strong dog. Here he's pulling. He jumps into her lane. She does a circle spin, slows him down a bit. Now he's pulling toward odor. She's about to pull him into another circle spin, not reading him, but in fact he's actually moved toward the aid and has found it. So he can be a fast dog. She's a tiny, tiny person. And we frequently need to kind of slow him down a little bit, and that's one key way to do it. All right, so we're going to jump into some on-leash training exercises now, but I want to go through something that's really, really important, and this I've learned from Don Blair, and he continues to refine information in the steps of a detection. So anytime you begin your dog on a search, there's a start, and this should be a very clear and well-defined cue that's used to start the search. Dawn has always told me I recommend both a verbal and a physical cue, so generally what I do is my command is search. I pull back a little bit on the collar or the harness, I pat the chest, and whatever direction I'm going in, that's where I'm sending the dog. And I say search, and I usually am pretty blessed, but most of my guys are highly motivated for their reinforcement, and they go right off, and their behavior is quite clear. They are actively searching the air for odor, and that's exactly what I want. If you have a start and your dogs are not behaving that way, then there are key exercises that you can do to make this much more clear to the dog. And usually it's one of the first things that we can see. If you think back to that one video of the Labrador, you know, her start was pretty weak. She probably gave a command, but she might talk to that dog a lot, and he probably didn't even hear it as a command. In that context, he had no context for it. So it becomes really important that we set up the exercise so the dog learns the context for that cue, no matter where it occurs. Dogs that, after they hit the start, they'll go into an active hunting and discrimination phase. And this is when you start to see that change in the behavior, that the head is up, the tail is often up. They should be hunting for your target odor. Once they hit that target odor, whether it's at a distance or nearby, there's going to be a very clear change in their behavior indicative of odor acquisition. And what we see is the 3 Ps. There's a physical change to their body. There's a physiologic breathing change. They'll start to, you know, there's a different sound to how they breathe. And then there's a psychological change. They know reward is coming, right? And frequently, I don't know if anybody is a fan or is aware of Sapolsky's work on dopamine dumps, which is the pleasure center of the brain and a neurotransmitter in the body that makes us feel really good. But this doesn't come in the body at the time that the reward is actually given. It comes before in anticipation of the reward. And we want to see that. We want to leverage that with our dogs because it increases their motivation to actually get to that odor. And so that becomes really important, that this alert is super clear to you as a handler. Then we have what we call an interest phase, where they're bracketing and working toward that source, trying to identify exactly where that odor is hidden or placed, or if it's a full body out there, where that is. And so, again, on some of these exercises we're going to describe, you'll see a dog move in and out of the odor cone, assessing concentration gradients, working into negative areas, and then back into the odor, and to figure out the direction when they are in odor and what's going to get them there the quickest. And this particular phase is something dogs really have to learn. And this is where the field work becomes so important. And you can see it in a very grand scale. On these point-to-point exercises, that's much more clear to the dogs, and I see a big difference in dogs that have kind of grown up and been trained using some of these methods than those that haven't had this. Their bracketing skills are much stronger, and you can see that they can get to that odor source easier. Once they get to that source, there almost needs to be a mental confirmation in their mind. And frequently where we can create some confusion right at source is if we get a reward in a little bit too soon and they haven't really decided, and that's when you get dogs that maybe are moving kind of away from source. Oh, I don't have to do as much as I needed to. So it's important to wait for that mental confirmation in the dog's mind. Yes, this is it. Ideally, if you're at that stage in your training, they go to that trained final response behavior that we want them to do, that sit, that bark, that down, that whatever it is. That says, hey, pay me, hairless monkey. Then what becomes really important is that reinforcement and that reward. And, you know, the topic of motivation and utilizing exactly what the dog wants and playing with the dogs well. I think, Paul, I believe you had given, are going to give or giving a talk on this through your organization. Highly recommend that people attend that. But you got to work on your play skills. You got to up your game for this. This is the most important thing. And we spend most of our time playing with our dogs versus actually doing the detection work, because if they don't associate the two, then then your detection is always going to be weak. Your dogs have got to want their reinforcement. And then an often piece that is missed in your training scenarios is a repeat and a restart, right? With some of our high drive dogs, they have a tendency to maybe lose their mind once they have their toy. And that, in my mind, is a little bit of a problem, because if you do restart them, you've got less dog. I don't mean a physically tired dog, I mean a dog whose brain is now unfocused. And so setting up scenarios where you are constantly allowing those dogs to, find one, and then another, and then another, and have that repeat restart each time becomes a really important element. So these steps of a detection allow you, once you understand how your dog looks in each of these steps, what is going on when you're out there in a blind scenario. You can actually get a better sense of, is this real, is this not real? Is this a distracting odor to the dog? Are they making good decisions? How quickly are they making those decisions? And what is going on? And then when the wheels fall off the bus with regard to one of these elements, you can actually take these pieces out, work on that. Today we're going to work on the alert. Here's how I'm going to set up a problem. Today I'm going to work on the train final response. Here's how I'm going to set up that problem. Today I'm going to work on starts, because boy, that seems to be going somewhere it shouldn't be going, and here's how you set up that. But you have to be able to decide and diagnose where in this full behavior chain of things that are going on in every detection exercise, whether it's a long one or a little tiny short one where you're training a vehicle and your first aid is on that driver's side tire, this whole behavior chain will happen even if it's happening in 0.5 to 2 seconds of searching, right? And so you need to be able to figure out where it's going right and where it's going wrong. So on-leash detection exercises, we're going to start with the point-to-point, which you've already seen an example of one dog not doing a point-to-point well. We've got a couple of kind of goofy animations that I put together, but essentially you're going to be working that dog perpendicular to a scent cone at a distance. It's an opportunity to teach really strong starts. It tests odor recognition. You saw that Labrador in that earlier video just didn't have it. Like, he might know anise, which was in that ball out there, but he didn't have the context for it, and he thought he was doing something else. So it tells us right away, all right, we got to work on our odor recognition. It enhances bracketing behavior, clarifies motivation for odor reward, and is probably one of the most powerful exercises. With my group, we do point-to-points every single training, and if I have only a little bit of time to do training with my dogs, I'm setting up point-to-points, and these can get quite complex, or they can be quite simple. They can be done as a highly motivating exercise, or they can be done to teach and reinforce certain elements. Okay, so as the dog moves perpendicular to the window, you're going to start outside the odor cone, so you have a distinctive negative area. You want to then cue the search, move the dog out. They should be in front of you on an 8 to 10 foot line from point A to point B, moving through the odor cone. All right, so you actually want the dog to be pulling you through this for this particular exercise, or at least be ahead of you. What you do want to see is once they're in that odor cone and it's at a threshold that is detectable and understandable to that dog, right? You could potentially have a dog outside that odor cone, or the threshold is too low for them. That's good information, right? You can move them closer to that odor cone. Outside the cone, you should see hunt behavior. Inside the cone, you should see alert and interest and bracketing. Let the dog take you. If the odor obedience is strong, they should pull you to the source. In some cases, you're going to need to drop that leash. Dog should trace the source, perform the train final response, reward, and repeat when you can. All right, so here's my goofy animation. This is my detection dinosaur. We've got a source and we've got the wind coming down, and here's our source, the giant skeleton, and this is my odor cone. All right, it's kind of a weird schematic. So we're going to move my dinosaur through the odor cone. Here we see a change in behavior. Pretty simple. He turns into source and he goes and performs his train final response. Super, super simple setup. So that's your most basic point-to-point. And ideally, you could do this on a football field. You can do it on giant parking lots, and ideally you can set up, say, 3 or 4 odors all down a line. So you can do, one, boom, reward, restart. Get into the second one, boom, reward, restart, etc. If you have a large enough area to do that. In our next scenario, again, it's the same setup. We've got wind in the source. We have our odor cone, but here we're going to consider this a quartering exercise. So we have our little detection dinosaur, and he's well outside of his threshold for detection. He's going to kind of go across, and he's got nothing. So we're going to take him up, depending upon your conditions, 10, 15, 20 feet into that odor cone. He's going to go across, and he still doesn't have anything. And so here's where your dog should be actively hunting throughout all of this period. So if you're looking to add negative time to your dog, here's one of the ways to do it. This also enhances their ability. Once they understand this exercise, their hunt becomes stronger and their odor threshold of detection becomes lower. Your source can be the same size out there, but in fact, your dogs will become more and more sensitive to this. It's another element that's super powerful about this exercise. So we go up a little bit further, we quarter some more, we pull our dog through it, and here's where we would start to expect to see something. So our next dinosaur is turning into that source, kind of coming across. Sorry, he flies away in that case, but in fact, he's coming back and he's directed towards source, and then he actually hopefully performs his trained final response at source. So a little bit goofy, but hopefully that clarifies how you would set up that exercise. To make that even more complex, like we'll run these in orchards where we work the dogs up and down the rows, and with orchards, of course, you've got all these trees that are then causing all of these splitting of those odor cones. And it's a super, super good exercise. It works the dogs really hard, depending upon the level of their experience. We took the team up just a few weeks ago, and like our green dogs probably took 10 minutes to really figure out where that source was. It can be a little bit frustrating, but it's also cool to kind of push that a little bit. And our more experienced dogs found it in 2, 3, 4 minutes at a time and were able to really hone in. They understood those kinds of parameters. So here's another little video of a point-to-point. This is a green dog. This is my dog Zoe stand when he was being handled by my friend Julie. You know, we're on pavement because we don't need environmental distractions at this stage. You can still see he's still just checking out. This is all negative. He does know odor at this stage of the game, and he's just kind of walking out right in front. He's doing his hunting thing. He's even stronger in hunt now that he's a little bit, he's quite a bit older now. It seems like I was having a hard time finding new video. Everything is kind of a little bit older, but what you'll see as he gets a little bit further up is you'll start to see some changes, some pushing there with a little bit of something. He doesn't quite know how to work it out at this stage of the game there. Now that's real. You see an increase in his speed. He's driving towards source. And there's some serious distance here. This isn't a ginormous odor. There's no arm out there. It's just, you know, placenta and some T-balls kind of thing. But he's got enough at a very young age that, you know, and if Julie had him, he's under a year here because she fostered him for a little while. So he's probably been on odor for 4 months maybe at this point in time. So he's doing it right at source. He's bracketing. He doesn't have a trained final response at this point, but once his nose is on source, he gets his reward. Here's another on-leash point-to-point. This is my old dog, Cypher. More experienced dog. These are burned remains, which he didn't have a lot of exposure to. We're out in a more busy environment, but the dog's nose is up. He's not checking out environmental odors. He'll drop his nose here and there. We just keep moving him forward. You know, and again, he's a little bit closer to me at this point. But he's clearly not showing me any kind of change in behavior. This is all clear negative. He's hunting. I know he's hunting because when he does encounter odor, it's very obvious and very clear what's going on. So he's still in the hunt phase, but here, right there, you see something, and you'll see him right there. Boom, increase in speed, driving towards source, bracket, and then he comes into a fairly large source here. Not quite sure what it is. Trained final response is a little slow, but it's a newer aid to him. And then an off-leash point-to-point. This is actually my live find dog. You can have really fast dogs. He is, you know, balls to the walls out here, and we have a person, but you see the head come right up, and you see him come right in for that button hook and into his trained final response. So you can have really fast dogs that will have that odor recognition. Again, a live find person, you know, I mean, the person out there is, you know, 150, 200 pounds, so it's a little bit different than our small aids that we're working with. But, you know, the same kind of training applies to your live find dogs as well. There's going to be situations where they need to be able to perform on leash. There are obviously times when you want to drop the leash. And frequently we do once we see that really strong commitment. But if you're able to hang on, you can actually kind of slingshot your dog into source, and it actually increases their motivation a little bit. But it's absolutely fine once they've made a very strong commitment to that odor to drop the leash at that point. I have dogs sometimes, especially if I'm training in similar areas, I'll drop the leash too prematurely and I got to go get it again. They might be pulling toward an object, they might be pulling toward something else, and I misinterpreted it. So again, it takes practice and it takes time to be able to evaluate what your dog is actually doing. So point-to-points are huge, and highly recommend people investigate, setting those up and working your dogs on them. Another really good exercise are wall work. You can do this on, I use a lot of school exteriors, lockers are great, any kind of long wall where there is similar features along that wall is really, really good. It's good for fast and hectic dogs. We kind of want to get them into a little bit of a doggy zen where they're just moving more methodically along. You want to place aids at a little bit more of a distance so they get some nice long negative stretches. You can obviously add distractions to this, and they're investigating those distractions should also slow them down, and you should actually be able to see them make good decisions that way. You want them to work those long surfaces with their nose turned in a nice steady pace. If the dog comes off the wall or comes into your handler lane, you can pull, or is starting to pull without odor present, you can perform the circle spin. So the circle spin is used when the dog is clearly not searching, is coming off the wall due to distraction, or simply pulling when there's no odor present. It could be considered a negative punisher, right? The dog is being removed from the opportunity to obtain their reward. So you want to be aware how this impacts your dog from a motivation standpoint. But in most cases, we're able to sort of remotivate the dog and get them more focused after the circle spin. If you think back to that video of Linda in chaos on the wall out there, and I think I have another video of her, he actually settled a little bit better until he hit the odor cone, and then he increased his pace again. So that becomes an important piece. You don't want to do this if you know where the aids are and you miss an aid, right? That becomes a big cue to the dog that, if I miss an aid, she'll just circle spin me and I'll get to find it again. So you want to be aware, let the missed aid be the missed aid. Recognize what's going on. Was the dog distracted? Were they pulling off the wall? Were they moving too fast? In that case, you're going to want to increase your aid size so that they hit a wall of odor and they start paying closer attention. And of course, it has to be associated with good reward. Good search dogs are motivated for their reward. If you're seeing them kind of blow through things for other reasons, then often it's a motivation issue. And obviously, we want to be aware to not do this when your dog is actually pulling toward odor. And sometimes we know, and sometimes it can be a little harder for us to figure that out. So here's my friend Linda again with chaos on those storage lockers. She sends him to work. He's much more methodical and careful. He's had a couple of fines now. He's starting to realize there's some productive areas. He kind of gets a little off there, though. He's picking up his speed. His nose wasn't turned in. She circle spun him, and now he's a little bit more settled in the work. He can be a bit of a hectic dog to handle, and that usually works really, really well for him. And here, of course, we're being a little bit of a boob with better train funnel response, but that's all right. Here's another example of wall work. This is my female sonnet, and we set this up particularly for our more hectic dogs, where we want them to be focused on sort of the doors and sucking some seams there. And the little circle spin settled her in as well, and then she was able to get to where there was an actual aid. And then here's our buddy Chaos doing a similar problem. And what I really like about this video is he became very much more focused on things that are productive, and you can kind of see him, I missed something here, and he's actually kind of correcting himself. And Linda's just letting him work, recognizing that he's in some odor now, but he's not convinced exactly where it is, and so he's having to work a little bit harder. But does he look like a dog that isn't independent in his work? She's just, keeping an eye. She can see the change in behavior, knows that he probably has something, and now he's moving off and he's figuring out where it's at. All right, so wall work, super, also good on-leash exercise. And then training interior searches, and this is similar for vehicles as well. I know Greg Cole is going to be coming up pretty soon, and I'm not sure if his topic is vehicle searches, but we'll let him talk about that because he's excellent at it. So we're going to talk about interior searches, and this is training using a search sequence, and it's essentially pattern training. It does train the dogs to be a little bit object-oriented, but in this case, if there's areas that you know you want things to be searched, if there's lockers or drawers or things like this where things could be hidden, or we want to get the dogs to be, seeking odor from, then you do want to place aids in those key areas. When you can start in relatively clean rooms, which can be difficult. It's always hard to find training venues. Generally, as I'm working a dog through a doorway, I'm going to load the first corner and then start to the left, working that dog clockwise. You want to build experience to work the walls to the corners, and you want your dog ultimately to be a bit of a can opener. With experience, you can continue to load these productive areas, and you'll start to see the dogs will pattern this on their own, and they have an expectation where they're going to go first, where they're going to go next. And so this is my little puppy who is, really, really grass green. He's about 6 months old now. He's got good odor recognition. He's done lots of point-to-points, but this is actually the first time he's ever been in a building doing this kind of work. And so, this is a little bit of a cluster because he's a puppy, and I don't expect amazing things from him at this age. But, we bring him in, he gets his cue to search, he's on his little harness, he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. But then we've got odor right there near that first corner. It's in that desk. I'm going to kind of help him into the area a little bit. Boom. He doesn't have a trained final response, but boy, here comes his toy. He's a happy kid. And this is a second room, and so we would have 5 or 6 of these rooms set up with him. I, again, kind of want to drive him into that corner to kind of start to encourage a certain pattern as he works around the room. And now he's got something, a little distracted, not quite sure where. Working up, but you can kind of see that he's working it out, and there's his toy. And this got better. We did this, I think, 2 or 3 days in a row, and we saw some nice improvement. So here's our day 3 search work with the same puppy. He's kind of moving right into that area. First thing, boom. And I know we have a couple more rooms. And these are done one after another, and so the dog starts to learn that sequence. Here's where I check, and you can kind of see he's more independent. It's in the drawer that's a little bit open there. He tends to get stuck under the desk a bit, but, oh, there. And one more room. But you can see he's out in front. He's, still working pretty independently, even though he's actually on leash. And there's his aid. So it's a nice progression in a pretty short amount of time, with kind of the right environmental setup. And these were really hot days, so they were getting pretty gassed during the work. And this is an aid that's a little bit deeper in the room. It's actually in the radiator corner there. And that's it. He's actually starting to get a trained final response of a look back. That's not what we're going to stick with, but he's starting to offer it. All right. And then, similar with a more experienced dog search sequence, we were doing quite a lot of work on thresholds. It's very common, and we'll talk about it, for dogs to blow through thresholds as they're going into rooms. And so we were doing quite a lot of just, loading thresholds, and making sure dogs were really checking the thresholds thoroughly. And you can kind of see that he's going toward productive areas. We'll talk a little bit about the threshold work there, the pattern we do. But he's working relatively independently on all of this. Boom. All right, and then when there's things in the middle of the room, we basically work, again, dog stays on the left, and we work them counterclockwise And this was more of a room that was set up for breaking planes and trying to make sure the dogs were getting on top of things and over things. But same kind of pattern. So we would still work the exterior. So we had already searched the whole exterior of this room, and then we came back to do everything in the center. And, you know, I'm 50 years old, and I can't remember where I've been unless I utilize some manner of a search pattern. So as a handler, if I'm searching something on a deployment, it helps me know exactly where I've been if I follow this pattern, and the dogs will then work it really, really well on their own. So a little bit of a word about clearing thresholds. You know, I would recommend that if you're on a deployment, you want to be the first into your building or into your room that you've been designated to search. Don't allow other people to precede you because it'll disrupt any odor cones that are in there. So you want to be first in and get your dog first in that room. You want to clear that doorway. I do a clockwise circle, one leash length out and back to the threshold. But I don't teach this until the dogs are already opening cans basically around that clockwise exterior of the room. So I wait till I have that search pattern, and then I'll kind of hold them. And you saw me do that with one of my older dogs. If you have a door that opens inward, be sure your dog can check behind that door once you're in the room, and go from there. So here's some of the threshold work that we were doing, you know, recently to kind of remind dogs of what they need to do. And so this again would be, you know, 8 or 9 rooms, and it's just thresholds, and you've got dogs that are then checking everything. And then we're moving into another room, little circle, send him to search. He does that circle on his own. Again, it's all patterned. Boom, hits that, train final response. You know, and this whole semicircle initially is kind of from the bomb dog world, where, you know, you kind of want the dog to, if he's going to detonate anything or clear the room, make sure it's clear and nothing at the threshold is gonna get you. In this case, Ostan wasn't wrong, but he wasn't showing me exactly where the aid was. He can be a little lazy, so I got to make sure he gets right to source before he gets his reward. And that one's right. Again, you know, we keep reiterating the same pattern. This is all one training day. Here he's being a little lazy. It's actually in that corner of the closet. And so it's nice to get him to work a little bit harder. All right. Here's another example of kind of a start in one of those doors that open inward. The aid in this case is actually in that the light switch there right by the door. And so you can imagine as I open this, what's going to happen to the airflow. It's gonna pull odor out, and so you see a real distinctive change in behavior when he's past the door, and he's got to kind of work back into it. I just stay out of his way. All right, so working a room. So always our pattern is clockwise around the exterior, dog always on the left. Work them into those corners. If you see them miss something, there's two things going on, right? They're either being a little bit lazy, and you need to circle spin them back to get them into those corners, or they are moving into odor. Odor always trumps search pattern. So if you feel your dog is actually bracketing something, his interest, you're seeing that alert, that change in their body, their breathing pattern has changed, then that absolutely trumps your search pattern. And so you want to follow that. You want to make a note where you left your search pattern, just follow that to that odor source. And then you can go back and finish your search in that area. And so we train all of that through aid placement. You teach the dogs to check productive areas, to draw out odor from drawers and door seams, to break planes. So we'll place things on top of things and do, you know, a series. You know, today's goal for training is we're gonna get these dogs breaking planes. So every aid is going to be on top of something, getting them up. You know, or you know, thresholds. Today, that's the objective of our training. We're going to work all these thresholds, and you'll see these dogs understand these concepts and then apply them. Today we're going to do elevated aids. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to probably use some props, and we're going to allow those dogs to work up to those props. Okay? So seam sucking. So recognize that not in all cases will odor be favorable, right? If you don't have positive pressure under door seams, then the air is actually being sucked into the room, not being pushed out. And so actually getting your dogs to learn how to suck seams is a skill where you put a decent size aid in those cases, and you start to get them to really check those productive areas after they've already been successful with positive pressure rooms. And so this is Leon. And I guess we don't have good volume here, but he is sucking the life out of those door thresholds because he's been very, very successful in the past with those. But I don't really have sound coming through, so. All right, finally, one more exercise, and that is distractions. So for this, you can use any kind of box, discrimination. Boxes are often called cinder blocks, paint cans, plastic toilet flanges, etc. We typically use, these box setups, start with odor only in blank. So a lot of people are like, okay, I'll do this once in a while, but then they never do it again. This exercise is so important because it teaches the dog to identify things that are not source when he's searching and to make really good decisions, right? We want those dogs to make not only good decisions, but rapid decisions. So when a dog is working down a box lineup like this, he should be going, no, no, interesting, no, no, yes, right? We want it just like that, nice and methodical. That hones in on the dog exactly what they're looking for. And the best way to do this is, again, as an on-leash exercise, because you can keep the dog in that area, you can continue them moving forward. So generally when we introduce this as a concept, we start with odor only and blanks. And that becomes very black and white. These are just empty boxes, no big deal. Oh, this one's really interesting. This is also a good exercise to work on your trained final response as well, because it can usually be done pretty cleanly here. But that no, 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 yes is super important. So with the discrimination training, you can gradually add lineups of distractors. You can do high odor with low levels of distractors. And typically when we first do this, if I'm working on a human remains dog, then in the first time that I'm going to introduce distractors, I'm going to use things that are not organic in nature. I'm going to use, some cleaners, laundry detergent, chemicals, ethanol. I might throw some toys in a box, things like that that are clearly not organic. And then as the dog gets better at this and understands this, I'll use, food, I'll use animal bones or animal remains, I'll use, things that the dog would be more confused and also more interested in, okay? And then over time, what you're going to do is like equal odor to the distraction level. And then later on, you're going to do low odor with high distraction. So a very small amount of your source aid, and then ginormous amounts of dog food, kitty litter, cat poop, dog urine, etc. The other thing is if you find that you have a dog that, say, can't get off, say, pee odor outside, and that's a perpetual problem, we'll collect a whole lot of doggy pee and put it in all of these boxes except for your HR box. And pretty soon you're going to see that dog be like, okay, yeah, whatever, pee is not a big deal. My odor is it, if you've got a good motivation and reinforcement history with that dog, right? So these are other ways where you can utilize these distraction boxes to your own good. Great exercise, especially in the wintertime when it may be harder to train outside. I do a lot of these outside as well. You do want to watch your wind direction. So you don't want to have your hot boxes be blowing downstream because then you won't have that careful checking, right? They'll just be like, running toward odor when in fact this exercise is about, I need you to sniff these things and make decisions about them, all right? So here's an example of my little female sonnet doing a single blind discrimination on loaded boxes. This was, a few years ago. And we had everything in these boxes and pretty high threshold. We had live animals in one of them, rats. And, she's keeping up a nice pace. And you can tell that she's interested. She's actively sniffing every single box. And that's exactly what we want. And then she goes to her trained final response. We restart on the other end. And she's nice and clean. So that's exactly what you're going for. What frequently happens when you start these is the dog is rushing, they're not searching. So here's a great time where you can practice your circle spins. You can kind of slow the dog down and you can get them restarted on it. Again, these are kind of artificial exercises, but they really cement key concepts with the dogs. And so doing this 3 or 4 times a month is probably appropriate for most people. We don't do it as much, but we probably do this 2 or 3 times a month. And the dogs know the exercise, they enjoy it. It can be quite motivating for them. And, you know, there can be some hang-ups. The other thing I really like to do is I do train with some nosework people that are absolutely fabulous. And when we'll mix in the nosework odors in this, or with other narcotics handlers, or et cetera. And what you'll get, along with these other new odors for your dogs, is you're going to get a dopamine dump where a happy event took place at a nosework box. And you'll see your dogs change their behavior. Some dogs will false there. And so, you know, that becomes another level of distraction that you can add into this particular exercise that really can be quite powerful. All right. So that's pretty much the talk. I hope, based on some of these exercises and what I've said, is you get a better sense of how important leash handling is for dogs and for handlers as far as training things, and then also for deployment. It gives you a really, really good skill set and a basis for on-leash work and, of course, off-leash as well. It does require a lot of practice and experience. You know, some dogs are definitely easier to handle than others. I've got some, you know, pretty hectic dogs that, you know, I'm always like, oh, if you would just slow down, you know, and I got to keep my running shoes on and keep up with them. So it can be challenging. It's not always as elegant as it may seem. In some cases, you want to keep everything as loose as possible, really maintain that independence of the dog. In others, such as those point-to-point exercises, we actually want to take advantage of the opposition reflex. We want them to be pulling into the collar when they're in that odor cone. But, you know, hopefully my take-home message is this is a critical skill for our HR handlers, and it gives those dogs on-leash and off-leash skills. So, Paul, I will turn it back over to you, and we can answer any questions that there might be.
Sounds great. That was an absolute fabulous presentation. A lot of great information has been covered in that. So we're going to open this up for questions. If anybody has questions, and that's coming from both our Facebook live stream and our Zoom stream. So if you post them, we will try to take the time and answer them. No, we do not make the PowerPoints available from these monthly trainers forums, but what we do have available is a recording of this will be posted. Actually, it's already posted in the Facebook page for the monthly trainers forum. And then from there, in a couple of weeks, this will be available on our YouTube channel. Okay. Yes, Carolyn. We typically have encouraged off-leash HRD, but as Liz has pointed out, this is extremely important for our HRD dogs. Another question, I guess, from Mary over in Facebook Live. So, on Zoom, Lisa Kirk has a question for you, Liz. For vehicle search, you prefer on leash?
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a huge quantity of vehicles, like if they give you an impound lot, I would start that with a point-to-point, to be honest, on leash. Again, to eliminate just, based on what the wind direction is doing, look at what's that's going on, run them as a point-to-point to see if you can identify vehicles of particular interest. Or if you're given, say, 5 vehicles to search, that's pretty easy. Again, we would do the same thing when we train the dog. We would load the productive areas of the vehicle to teach them to be a can opener in and around the seams of the vehicle, the tires, the trunk, the engine, the gas pipe, etc. And you train all that on leash as well. And then I would also work it on leash. It looks exactly like the wall work. It looks exactly like the search sequence we do in a building. It's just around a vehicle.
Okay. Also from Zoom, Doug asked, would you start a young puppy on point-to-point using food? At what age would you start them?
So when I start my puppies, I start with play. And I prefer to use toys with my dogs because of a couple of reasons. One, I get greater motivation, I get greater energy, and that's one of the things that I learned really early on in all my work. And so even with the smallest, the youngest puppy, I will start with play, with chase and catch, with things like possession games. These are both some of the work that Ivan Balabanoff, and he's got videos that give you key skills in using those games to develop motivation with your dog. I don't train, believe it or not, with food at all anymore. I used to be a big advocate of that, doing a lot of luring and touch pads and things like that. I'm now, these puppies that we're working with here, we're training them entirely with play, so everything is with play. I might throw a treat in their crate to get them to crate up, but that's about it. They eat in their crates, they don't work for food all the time. So everything is around play, and yes, when that play I feel is good enough, and they want what I have, and they want the game I have, then I do odor introduction using the towel method, which is the customs method, right, where you basically utilize clean terry cloth towels, and you soak them in a jar. They don't actually have HR on them, and I know Paul's very familiar with this technique and can probably explain even better than I can, but they get the odor of the HR on there. And so, and you basically do some retrieves with the puppy, and then you start retrieving into tall grass. And this is all done when we imprinted our puppies on HR. I think we did 5 training sessions with 3 or 4 tosses each. And when I saw the motivation was super high, and you pull the puppy away, you toss it into the grass, you turn them around, and you make sure that wind is favorable. And when they find, it, they bring it back, they get the game. And then what I'll do is I'll put a towel out. We'll do a point-to-point with the towel. We'll see if we have odor recognition. If we don't quite have odor recognition at that point, we do a little more towel throws and all of that. Like, we've got 2 puppies right now. One had it right away, and the other one needed a bit more time. He needed a little bit more to make sure that game was strong with the towel. And then once we see that good, strong odor recognition, we split. And the dog then is working just toward whatever your odor source is in a jar or a T-ball or whatever you're using, and then they're getting the reward. I do use markers, and so the dog is learning markers, so when they're correct, they get a yes, and that means reward is coming. In some of the videos that you saw, if you've got somebody that's really good, that the dog's like noses on source and get the toy in there, then that association gets made very, very quickly. If you do feel you really want to use food with your dog, then you're probably going to be using like the toilet flanges that Mike Suttle uses for Logan House, or a box or something like that to create those associations. I don't like food for, as I mentioned before, for a couple of reasons. One, food actually can create a little bit of a submissive state with your dog, and that's not what I'm looking for in my detection dogs. I want them to be, full throttle, excited to do this. But in fact, if you think about it, especially with young puppies, what does a puppy do to the mother to get them to regurgitate food? Right? They lick their mouth, and it's a very submissive posture to the dog, and some of that can translate over into your training work if you're constantly using that. The other piece with food that I don't like is food is all about, in the body, in a physiologic way, it's rest and digest. It's not go and find more aids. You know, you eat and then blood goes to your stomach to digest that. You've actually got a little less blood flow to muscle groups and things to continue working. And I know we're not feeding our dogs massive meals at source, but again, I start with play. That's what I use, and that's kind of the process that I follow. And so I'm always looking not to stay on any one stage. I'm always looking to progress the dogs as quickly as I can. Like, I don't want dogs to be mouthing my aids, right? So I don't want them to be on towels for too long, because that can create those kinds of associations like, oh, you know, HR is good, I want to eat it, I want to chew on it. I just want them to smell it and give me some behavior, which is my next step with my puppies, is I got to, you know, pick my trained final response, and then they'll get their toy reward. I hope that helps, Doug.
Okay. I'm going to jump back over to our Facebook Live viewers. Jeff Young kind of has a comment and a question. Back in my law enforcement days, was taught the walking backwards and the magic hand technique for vehicle searches to ensure we're getting coverage where needed. Why the switch to behind the canine and allowing them to pass scenes?
So there's kind of two parts to answer that. So one is obviously without the magic hand with some handlers and some dogs, even if odor is present and say the handler missed a location, some of these dogs would miss it. Like it's hand plus odor equals my reward, not odor only. And so that's a little bit of a concern. Plus it's a cueing issue, which has become more of a legal issue in courts of law and things like that. There's a lot of handler interference there. And so now with training to find, with training using productive areas in the dog in front, the dog is focused outward and is leading the search, is in more control of the search. If there is something missed, that's where that circle spin comes in. It is the handler's job. You are a team to be evaluating what is your dog searching. And frequently, especially for search and rescue handlers, where we often don't have tons of access to a million vehicles to set up training sessions that hit all of these pieces, you know, with good repeatability to create that reliability, or clean rooms like those dormitory rooms that we were training in. You know, it can be difficult for us to get enough training in those environments to get rock solid dogs. And so you as a handler have to be very aware of what your dog has searched and what they haven't. You have to be very aware of the environmental conditions, what the direction the wind is going in. You know, if you have an aid that the dog misses on one side, I know a lot of people are suggesting that you then work the dog in the other direction. Well, those of us that are used to working the dog on the left will find that very, very awkward, and our dogs find it very awkward. And the reality is, show me a problem where odor is unavailable in one direction versus the other. In reality, it's an issue with your training, and you need to recognize that and go back and make sure you're getting the types of training that you need in order to be successful. And if the dog misses an area, it's a circle spin. You can take them back and research that area.
Yeah, and next month we are going to get in more into vehicles and vehicle searches, because that is the whole center point of Greg Cole's presentation for the monthly trainers forum, and so we'll get into more about how to search vehicles and the switch over from the backwards walk with to, you know, now allowing the dog to lead that search. And so we'll delve more into that next month. Couple more questions from there. And this comes from Matt Valiant. If the dog's reward is tug and play, how do we know when there has been sufficient play to ensure the dog has proper motivation for more searching?
So one thing I didn't go over here, I reiterated a little bit when we talked about search sequence, was that start, restart, right? And so My dogs will play for hours. In fact, if you're familiar with possession games, like that game just blows their dress up to no time. But of course, I can't do that if I've got 10 aides out and it's a hot day, right? So over time, you've got to evaluate what is going to be rewarding for the dog. Ideally, what you want to get to with your dogs is that the hunting itself is also inherently rewarding to them. It gets associated with the entire behavior chain. And so in those cases, like I have a couple of dogs that like just the whole piece is motivating to them. They're highly fluent in it. They love the game at the end, but they also love the hunting portion. And so it's tying all of that in together. So how to make that determination. If you've got a young dog and you have focus issues, typically, puppies can be distracted. My puppies are young and, they play, and then at some point they kind of lay down, and then we play like a different kind of a modified game where I lay down with them and I'll still tug on the toy, but it's kind of at their level, but at some point, pretty quickly, I will take the toy back, and I don't have an out yet on my puppy, so it's just a quick choke off, and then he gets restarted, and that restart becomes super important, and they start to realize, oh wait, this is going to go again. And these are all very short problems, so I will set up a point-to-point, maybe there might be 2 or 3 of them. I can even send them back to the same one if I've played him out of the area. Very often we'll use like a rod in the middle of the field. They can't see it, but they can smell it until they get really close to it. And so you want to practice those restarts, but you want to watch the level of your puppy to make sure they're not getting tired, right? We want to keep them high. We want to keep them wanting more. We want to keep them pretty high for the game. So it doesn't have to be this super lengthy game. Watch your puppy, see how they respond to a new start. Are they going quicker into that hunt behavior? And are they getting quicker to that aid? If all of that is happening the way you want it, great. If you're seeing, oh, they're kind of distracting off, and you're like, okay, either I've gone too long, or the play is too tiring, or the play isn't enough, right? It can be any of those variables. And so go ahead and play with them. But also make sure you're taking your play outside your detection field and enhance it there. That's where your dogs will develop even more focus for both the game, but also for the detection exercise too.
A lot of that is just like Goldilocks and the 3 Bears with her tasting the porridge. Well, this is too hot, meaning this would be too much for the dog. This is too cold, meaning, well, maybe we don't have enough there. But this is just right. A lot of that comes with time and feel with the dog, and with a dog that is maturing, what might be too much 4 weeks ago might be not quite enough, a month down the road or 2 months down the road. So a lot of that is, trying to, be able to shift on the fly and recognize in your dog whether or not how they are responding in that moment. Another question from our Facebook Live. This is from Mary. First, kudos for some great graphics. Question, why is circling back off the wall negative punishment? What is the punishment part of the wall work?
So it's negative punishment, meaning we're taking away their opportunity for reward, briefly. It may or may not be construed by the dog that way, but essentially, once they've done some walls, they know that my aides are out there, and when I'm not working or I'm missing something, or hey, a squirrel just jumped out and I'm looking at that, I pull them away from what is going to be a productive area for them. So it's kind of considered a punisher, a negative punisher, because you're taking something away, and you're saying, hey, all right, too bad, so sad. But in reality, generally when it's done well and you have pretty motivated dogs, they're like, my bad, I checked out a little bit. And they come back with greater motivation, but also, more importantly, more focus. And that's what we want. We want to see a pace change. We want to see a head turned in. We want to see them back to what they are looking for.
Okay. Yeah, and with that, each dog is going to respond to it a little bit differently. For some dogs, that circle back, that's all they need. Some dogs, it's, no, let's go over here and take a siesta. We're going time out for a moment. And then I'm a big believer. I enjoy baseball, and it's 3 strikes, you're out. And at that point in time, the dog goes to its kennel, and it might be done for the day, it might be done for the session, it might be done for a week or 2 weeks, depending on what is actually going on. And so a lot of times when we think of punishment, um, we think of, you know, these horrible consequences and so forth. In reality, all it is removing them from being able to get what they want, which in working a wall or working a problem is ultimately about them finding the odor and saying, here it is, so I can get my ball, so I can get my toy. Um, so some really great questions, and they keep popping up. This is from Rosemary. How do you clean your leash after working a strong source? What is the difference in cleaning the leather versus biothane after the dog may have exposed the lead to strong odor?
So that's a good question. I think anything that is exposed to HR has the potential to pick up, a little bit of that odor. And, not all of us have the luxury of carrying our aids outside of our vehicles. And so we have to recognize that, most of our HR dogs have some low level of exposure, and we can imagine that exposure is, going to decrease their lower level threshold of detection unless you specifically work on it. So that's always a risk. It's the nature of what we deal with. I have a separate room and separate freezers and all of that for my materials, but I mean, it's still connected to, buildings in my yard, right? So you open that door and there's got to be exposure. I wish I had a bunker or something for this stuff, but it's not feasible. So we're always dealing with that. And so, cleaning your leashes or your harnesses and stuff, I'm just using normal standard cleaners, Murphy's oil soap for the leather goods, and, for the biothane stuff, I mean, you just can rinse that off with a hose. If you really wanted to, you could use ethanol on your biothane. I certainly wouldn't use it on my leather stuff. But that is a good point that, your equipment could potentially pick that up as a contaminant odor to smell. Yep.
When this is from Sandra. When bracking during training, is it okay to say good?
When bracketing during training, so obviously
Uh,
everybody's dog is going to be more or less sensitive to a handler's voice. Some dogs need a little encouragement. Some dogs, that will take some of their brain power. For me, good is a marker for duration. So I'll teach a dog, hey, I want you to sit at source, you're going to stay there. I might say good, or if I'm teaching a duration exercise. So it's a marker in my mind. But if it's in your mind, it's just an encouragement. That may be fine for some dogs. It may be distracting for others. My feeling is when a dog is bracketing, like I ran a point-to-point with my puppy this morning. I was super pleased with him. I don't say a word. I don't want to distract him. He's 6 months old. He's focused on odor. I want to just keep him focused on odor. But if you see a dog that is struggling a little bit or might need a little encouragement and it's not going to distract them, then maybe it's okay. I see
So
a question
jumping
from,
back to Zoom, Yeah, jumping back to Zoom, Carmen has asked, what brand of long leather leash would you recommend? There's so many options, it's kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I did a little plug for, there's a company called Bold Lead Designs. They have a website. I've had, their stuff is good quality, and you can basically order whatever width you want, whatever size clasp you want, and put splices wherever you want. And so, I've got, 3 or 4 leads from them, and I've had them now for years, and haven't had any issues with them. If you do have issues, they do take them back and fix them or get you a new leash. They've got a really good, so that is a group that I like. And the lines I have are really, really light. I forget exactly what the width is, but you can go on their website and take a look at that. So Bold Lead Designs is just one I really like. And they're not getting anything from this, so.
Yeah, we'll get a link or something like that and throw it up on the um, Trainers Forum Facebook page, since it was mentioned. I will also a line that I like, that I actually um, had made for myself, because I love my leather leads, and but sometimes, especially with a young dog, I might work on leash, and I don't necessarily always want to drop my nice leather leashes in the mud and the grime and the water and things like that. And so I had Bud Rogers uh, down at Canine Knives um, make me a 10-foot lead, but it's a 3/8 inch biothane, and it's stitched. It's not riveted. Again, he's not getting anything out of this. Bud's been doing this for a long time. Um, so one difference I have over Liz's recommendation of the 10-foot lead with the loop, I have a flat end. That way, if I do drop it, it's not going to get caught up potentially um, in the brambles and briars as much. So, but we will throw both of those up. Doug's got a question. Do you train one dog in both air scent, live detection, and HRD? If so, which one first? When do you start the other one? Now, I'll jump in here first, Doug,
Okay.
and say that no, I don't cross train. Uh, my live find dogs only work live find. My HRD only work HRD. I'll throw that over to you now, Liz.
Yeah, no, Paul, I'm with you. And so I have a live fine dog, and I have several cadaver dogs working now. And my primary reasons, and it's not because I don't believe dogs can't do both, and it's not that I don't believe they can't do both successfully. I do believe that they can. However, I have a full-time job, and I have, a lot of dogs, so there's a limited amount of time. I want my dogs to be as good as they can be in their disciplines. And we, for cadaver dog handlers, we have much more scrutiny on our training records, the number of hours we need to put into those dogs, if in fact we land in court, right? So this is a key thing. So if I'm diluting rather, my training by integrating live find work in there, to me that is difficult for me enough to get those 16 hours across 3 cadaver dogs and now a new puppy. So that's one reason. It's really a time constraint. The other reason is the level of reinforcement I can get on my HR dogs is so much greater than my live find dogs. Right? When I set up live find problems, I can maybe get 2 or 3 reinforcements in a training session. And that's it, because people don't want to hide for hours and hours, or they don't want to even, hang out, and the problems can be longer, and et cetera, and they're more limited in scope. So, my lifeline dog is very good, very focused on what he does, but, and I'm not worried about him from a deployment, because we're only going to find one person, but his reinforcement history in that exercise is so much lower than my cadaver dogs. They get 8, 10 training aids at a time. So their motivation, not that their motivation levels are different for the work, but they have so much more reinforcement history. So if you take and put all that in one dog, and let's say you're in a potential scenario where there's live people that you're looking for, but oh my gosh, there's a dead person, you may find that dead person because the reinforcement history is so much higher on that. They've just had so many more play sessions associated with HR. And that is also an easier training when you're by yourself, right? You can go out and set out some aids, some training aids, and beat out some quick training with your dog without having to, get victims to hide for you and everything else. So it's sort of that concern I have, that I do not cross-train dogs. It's time, but it's also the reinforcement history piece of it.
So,
yeah, I see this statement about
jumping
it.
back to,
We don't know what we will find, and it's absolutely a valid point. And I know there's groups out there that really say you have to do both. I say expose your dogs potentially in similar situations. Expose your live-fine dogs to HR. I bet you'll see a behavior change that is readable to the dogs. I know Center for Forensic Training and Education does have like a single-day training live-fine dogs that get exposed to whole human remains and stuff. I still think you'll see a readable behavior. I just don't know that your live-fine dogs have to also be HRD experts. We have to train for so much: low threshold, high threshold, vehicles, interiors, et cetera. There's more than enough training to be done in the HR realm. Live-fine in a lot of ways is a little bit easier in my mind.
I had the opportunity while teaching a class with Jimmy Canfield years ago down in Florida, and we had about half the class that was cross-trained. And one of the things that Jimmy posed to the class was, where do you think your dog is going to be its strongest? And so we went through, and about half the people said live fun, and half the people said cadaver. It's like, okay, so those that said live fun, we want you to send your dog for that individual person. And those dogs typically bypassed the living people and went to the odor source that was placed. And it in part goes back to what Liz was saying, as just the sheer number of repetitions that the dogs had received, whereas those that thought their dogs might be stronger in HR, well, um, most of those dogs went to the actual people instead that were just milling about and so forth. So sometimes it can be a mixed bag. Um, and yes, um, I know there's some teams that are still training. Your dog's got to do everything under the sun. But at the same point in time, um, recognize that sometimes our dogs have their own personal preferences. Like my first dog, she loved to do live find. She only did cadaver work because it made me happy. And specifically, she would go tell me where her teeth and bone were before she would tell me about anything that had thick, heavy odor to it. I'm going to, we've got like two more questions I'm going to share, and then we're going to have to wrap this up because there's been some really great questions tonight. Kathy writes, is praise good enough to keep her dog motivated to reset and search without the reward? And go ahead, Liz.
So the question is praise enough without the reward? And so on deployments or even our certification tests, we don't know if what the dog is indicating on is real or not, right? Hopefully your training tells you that, yep, we've been reliable, we got our trained final response in this, but generally it's not a good idea to reward unless you're 100% sure. So we want to introduce those kind of praise-offs in our training so that when it happens in a deployment or on a certification test, the dog recovers and can continue to do the work. And again, as the dogs become really fluent and the hunt for that odor becomes in itself a reinforcement, it becomes less and less of an issue. But in early stages of training, when I'm really trying to make a super strong association, I want to do one-to-one. I want you to find and you're going to get your reward, and I want you to find and you're going to get your reward. That's going to maintain that behavior. We know that it's a balancing act for, say, dogs with TSA or dogs that are, searching airports or train stations that, they're deployed, they do their shift. And if they don't get their training aids where they for sure get a reward, sometimes you're going to see a huge loss in motivation over time. So every time you deploy, don't forget you're breaking your dog a little bit, right? He has an expectation of a paycheck, and if you're, deployed and you're say you get into a pretty rich area and you've got 2, 3, 4, indications, say in a house where there's blood or some types of, small amounts of remains, it's highly recommended that you go back out and make sure you remotivate that dog with reinforcement again. So yes, you want to do both, but again, it's based on the experience level of the dog and what's going on with your deployment.
So I'm going to combine, this is going to be the last question. And I'm actually going to kind of combine a couple of questions to make this. This is coming from Kathy Ewing. One, she states that her dog's been trained off leash for everything. Should I retrain her? But also, from Stephanie Allen, can a dog that's been trained in competition, nose work and tracking for AKC, UKC, and so forth, be retrained for SAR and HRD?
Okay, so let me take the second question first. And Paula, I know you have the answer to this too. And generally, we don't want to take a dog that's trained in another odor type, such as nose work or narcotics or bombs or anything like that, only because you could end up in court. And we don't need an attorney to basically call into question the reinforcement history associated with clove, anise, and birch. And so, that in my mind is kind of a big no. Let's not do that. It does take time, to extinguish an odor. If you think back to Thorndike's, laws of learning, the things that are imprinted early on first tend to be more long-lasting and more difficult to extinguish from a behavior perspective. And so, I would say no, Paul. I suspect you would say no for the same reasons, right?
Yeah, it's something that really we should be extremely careful about. And, it's one thing if we take a tracking dog, a competition tracking dog, and do some retraining with it, because at least there we're still in the same general neighborhood. Whereas with
Right.
the nose work, the barn hunt, those type things, we're truly training those dogs on odors and on target scents that are not what we would be asking a dog to search for in a SAR or forensic environment. And if we did have that response from the dog, oh, we've just opened Pandora's box. So the more, if we can keep Pandora's box closed the majority of the time while we do this, the better off it's going to be.
Yep. And then the first question is, hey, I've done everything off leash. Should I retrain the dog to work on leash? And so, here's what I would say to folks that have done that, and that's really, really common. And that's one of the reasons why I showed that first video of that dog, the Labrador, who's, fantastic dog, had better context indoors for his odors. But that's probably what you're going to see the first few times you try to do a point-to-point outside with your dog on leash for search work. They're going to be like, what is going on? And, essentially what I would do is put out a massive amount of odor within the threshold of the dog. If you don't work massive odors, that's its own problem, but you know what I mean. A good amount of odor that your dog should be able to identify. Set up that point-to-point, put them on leash, and see what your handler influence is on that line, right? We want odor to trump leash tension. And so you're going to have to practice that. And that may mean, larger amounts of odor, run those point-to-points, and a much larger play session or whatever you're using to motivate the dog at the source. Get them used to that, because you could have a deployment where a leash makes a lot of sense. And then if you're used to doing your interior searches in your vehicles and things off leash, your dog can still be quite effective off leash. I'm not saying that being, everything has to be the end all be all, has to be on leash. The reality is, when you go into a building, let's say you've got a fairly large space, can you as a handler remember where your dog has been and where they haven't been? I can't. I'm so focused on my dog's behavior and trying to have a sense of where they've been. I need to take my building in chunks. I need to know, one, where he's been, where his nose has been. Has it been on top of things, underneath things? Is it checking these seams? Do I need to make sure he's checking some, do I see a change in behavior here? Is that indicated for something distracting, or is that potential for odor? What's going on? It's a lot of things going on in my mind and what I'm observing in the dog, that if my dog is just blowing through a building, I will have no idea what he has actually searched and what he hasn't. Generally, dogs that are completely worked off leash are pretty poor at detail work, unless you very specifically worked them to do that. But frequently they're moving quickly, they're moving through an odor cone that they expect to be there. But if you're going to be deployed for forensic type work where the blood or the tissue, things might be dried, and they really have to be far more detailed, then that's an on-leash exercise. They need to learn that method of deployment. Paul, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just spent this past weekend up in Wisconsin doing a workshop strictly on cold case work. And really a lot of that work we did was taking dogs that are used to working off lead and putting them on lead, getting them used to working on lead, because we needed the dogs to get shorter transects in their or shorter space between their transects or their cross lines. And you know, running these big, huge transects 20, 30, 40 feet, that might be great for the body that was dumped last month or, even the last couple months, because we're going to have plenty of odor that's going to be producing, that's going to pull that dog in there. Whereas when we start getting into a skeletal scatter, surface skeletal scatter, or we get into these older burials and things like that, we've got to be able to account for our dog's coverage in that search sector. And so, where a lot of teams are used to working 4 or 5 acres and saying, okay, that, and I can do that in an hour, say. I'm just tagging an amount of time there. Well, it might take you 30 minutes to do a half acre effectively for a cold case search. Um, so being able to bring a leash out to help the dog understand, no, I can't go let you go search the back 40 right now. Um, because what I'm really looking for is coverage. You know, I'm not even using probability of detection. I'm trying to use a percentage of coverage. And with this stuff, um, I might want a 95% of coverage of that area because of what we're actively searching for. And so it's not a matter of retraining. I think it's a matter of enhancing our training, adding another tool to the toolbox. And a lot of times, we as handlers, um, uh, we've gotten, if you look at a lot of the leads out there, a lot of the harnesses out there, I'm a big fan. The lighter, the better. The tactical approach, yeah, it looks cool. It looks sharp, but it doesn't really enhance what we're trying to do with our dogs. So that 3/8 inch, 10-foot leather lead, 10-foot biothane lead, um, that's going to be super lightweight. The dog is going to be able to maneuver with that, and it's not. We don't need the big 1 inch, 5 pound biothane lead. We're not breaking horses. We're not, you know, we're getting our dogs to understand that, oh, I need you to slow down and truly cover the area. Um, so it's not a matter of retraining, it's a matter of just continuing that training. So, with that, um, I'm going to go ahead and move on and say thank you, Liz. Thank you to everybody that joined us tonight. Um, I hope we've been able to challenge some um, notions that you might have had. Hope that you have found a new respect and understand the importance of including the leash as a tool in our bag of tools for working with our dogs. I do invite you all to join us August 30th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, it will be on Zoom. It'll be on Facebook Live. We will have Greg Cole, who is retired law enforcement. He has about 40 years experience of working with patrol dogs and apprehension dogs, and then cadaver dogs, narcotics dogs, done a little bit of all of it. He got his foundation in the Air Force, and after he left the Air Force, he wanted to go to work for SeaWorld, but decided he'd have more fun working for the Sheriff's Department playing with dogs. So he will be with us on August 30th. I do believe that might be either a Sunday or a Thursday. Time, go check out our shop. Um, this will be live, or the recording of this will be on the Facebook page for a while. Also, I ask you go subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of our monthly trainers forum recordings are on there. You can listen to them, replay them, and then if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me. Also visit the website. We've got webinars, remote coaching, and classes. So again, my hat is off to you, Liz. Thank you for coming and spending some time with us tonight.
You're welcome, Paul. Thanks for the opportunity.
Everybody, stay safe. Don't lick anything right now. It's not healthy for you. And wash your hands. Good night.